It was Christmas Eve, and snowflakes were dancing in the cold air outside. The little diner sat at the corner of a quiet street, glowing with yellow lights, warm laughter, and the smell of fresh pie. Inside, families filled the booths, sharing hot meals, stories, and the joy of the holiday. But in the far corner, near the frosted window, one table had only a single man sitting there, alone. He was dressed in an expensive dark coat and shiny leather shoes, the kind only rich people wore. His face looked tired, with deep lines near his eyes and mouth. His hair was neatly combed, but his eyes didn't shine. They just stared at the empty cup in front of him. He hadn't ordered food, just coffee, which had now gone cold. He didn't speak to anyone, and no one spoke to him. People noticed him, of course. Some of the younger waitresses whispered quietly. One of them said, "That's Mark Tenner, the CEO from the news." The other said, "What's someone like him doing here, alone, on Christmas?" But nobody had the courage to go near him. He looked powerful, but also deeply lonely, like a statue that had forgotten how to smile. Mark had chosen this small-town diner on purpose. It was far from his busy city office, away from the fake smiles and holiday parties filled with business talk. He didn't want to be around people pretending to care. His son hadn't spoken to him in years. His ex-wife had sent him a cold message earlier that day. "I hope you're doing well." There was nothing warm in it, only formality, like they were strangers now. Mark used to love Christmas. He used to set up a tree with his son, bake cookies, watch movies, laugh, and stay up late. But now, every holiday felt like a punishment. All the money in the world couldn't bring back those moments. So he sat quietly in the diner, letting the warmth around him pass like he wasn't even part of it. The bell above the diner door jingled, and a gust of cold wind blew in. People looked up, and in walked a small black girl with dark sunglasses and a white cane. She moved carefully, tapping the ground with her cane. Behind her came a tired-looking woman, holding the hands of two more kids, all bundled in mismatched jackets. The little girl's name was Lena, though no one had said it out loud yet. Her smile lit up the room in a way that had nothing to do with sight. She laughed as she smelled the pies and said, "Smells like cinnamon." The woman guiding her replied softly, "Yes, baby, it does," as they were shown to a table. Lena suddenly stopped. She tilted her head, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then, gently, she let go of the woman's hand and slowly walked toward the lonely man at the corner. Everyone watched in silence, unsure what she was doing. Mark looked up, surprised as the little girl stopped right at his table. She tapped her cane once on the ground, then pointed it toward the chair across from him. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice clear and innocent. "Are you having dinner with us this Christmas?" The question struck Mark like lightning. He blinked, confused, then looked around. Was she talking to someone else? No, she was talking to him. She couldn't see his expensive clothes, or his tired eyes, or the walls he had built around himself. She just heard someone sitting alone, and something inside her decided that wasn't right. Mark tried to answer, but his throat felt dry. I was just having coffee," he finally said, unsure of his own words. Lena smiled. "That's not dinner." She replied simply, "You can sit with us. We have extra space." The foster mother walked up behind her, looking embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," she said to Mark. "She's very friendly." But before she could pull Lena away, Mark raised a hand slowly. "It's okay," he said. His voice was low, almost broken. Maybe I will join you." The diner fell even more silent. If that was possible, even the people eating nearby stopped chewing for a moment. No one expected the powerful man in the corner to stand up, but he did, slowly, like he was waking up from a deep sleep. He followed Lena back to their table, where the kids were already giggling and setting out napkins. Mark sat down beside them, unsure how to act. Unsure why his heart was beating differently now. He didn't know it yet, but that one question from a blind little girl had already started to change everything. For the first time in years, he wasn't surrounded by money or lies or business. He was surrounded by people who had nothing but still chose to give. And he was about to learn what it meant to be truly full this Christmas. Not with food, but with something far more powerful: warmth, laughter, and the unexpected gift of being invited in by someone who couldn't even see him, but somehow saw him better than anyone ever had. Mark sat stiffly at the table, surrounded by warmth he wasn't used to. The kids were noisy but joyful, passing bread and asking for extra butter. Lena sat beside him, her hands feeling the edge of her plate, smiling as if she could see every face. The foster mother, Ms. Reyna, gently guided her, cutting her food and whispering softly. Mark didn't say much, only nodding when offered water, smiling politely when a child showed him a drawing made with crayon on a napkin. It had been years since he'd sat this close to such natural chaos. He didn't even know why he had said yes. Something in Lena's voice had pulled him in, like a rope thrown into dark water. He didn't feel judged here, not measured by his title or bank account. They hadn't even asked his name. Lena leaned toward him suddenly and said, "You sound tall." Mark blinked, unsure how to respond. I suppose I am." He replied awkwardly. "You eat very quiet too," she added, tilting her head like she was studying him with her ears. "Are you sad?" He froze, the fork in his hand halfway to his mouth. The question was soft, but it cut deeper than she could know. "I think so," he admitted quietly, his voice almost a whisper, "but I'm not sure why." Lena didn't answer right away. She reached for her cup and took a sip of juice, then smiled. "My music teacher says people forget how to cry because they grow too fast," she said. "Maybe you need to remember." Mark stared at her, wondering how a blind girl could see so much. The table buzzed around them, Reyna laughing with the boys, the youngest trying to balance a spoon on his nose. But to Mark, the world had narrowed to this tiny girl who couldn't see him but somehow knew him. A slice of pie landed in front of him, pumpkin with a swirl of cream. He looked up, and Reyna gave a tired but kind smile. "Can't let a guest go without dessert," she said. "I hope you like cinnamon." He nodded, "Thank you," and took a bite. It was warm, soft, and oddly familiar, like something from his childhood. Something his mother once made, back before the suits and boardrooms. Lena giggled suddenly. "You smiled," she said, pointing toward him even though she couldn't see it. "I knew you would," he chuckled quietly. Surprised at himself, the pie was good. But it wasn't just the pie, it was this strange table full of love. Full of noise, full of life, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a shadow in the corner. After dinner, the children began folding their napkins into animal shapes, something they said Lena was very good at. She created a swan just by touch and gave it to Mark. "Holding it out proudly for your desk," she said, "so you don't forget." He took it gently, staring at the soft folds made with small hands. "Forget what?" he asked. "That you smiled?" she said. "Tonight." Mark nodded slowly. His throat tightening, he looked around again at these strangers who had shared a meal with him like he belonged. And he wondered why did he feel safer here, at a worn-out table in a cheap diner, than he ever had in his luxury penthouse. The check arrived, and Mark instinctively reached for his card. But Reyna stopped him with a soft touch. "You're our guest," she said kindly. "Let us give you something for once." He didn't know what to say. He had spent his life buying everything, solving problems with money, controlling every outcome. But here, someone was giving him something he couldn't pay for: a seat at the table, a warm plate, a piece of pie, and a swan folded with love. As they all stood to leave, Reyna offered him a ride. He declined gently, saying he'd walk a little. Lena reached out, found his hand, and squeezed it with her small fingers. "You can come next year too," she said, "if you're still sad." Mark smiled, this time without hiding it. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "I think I'd like that," as the door jingled and the cold wind came rushing back in. The little group stepped out into the snow. Lena waved her cane in front of her, laughing as the snowflakes kissed her cheeks. Raina fixed the kids' scarves and they disappeared into the night. A family of misfits, stronger than they looked, Mark stood outside the diner holding the paper swan. Watching them fade into the snowy street, the lights inside flickered against the glass. He looked at the empty corner table where he had sat just an hour alone. Silent, forgotten, and now something had changed. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but it had begun. Because of a girl who couldn't see him, but somehow still found him. The snow was falling heavier now, but Mark didn't feel the cold as he walked slowly through the quiet streets. His coat was thick, but the warmth he felt wasn't from the fabric kit, came from somewhere deeper. He still held the tiny paper swan in his pocket, fingers curling around it like it might disappear. Cars passed by, full of families heading home, their windows glowing gold and filled with laughter. He used to be one of them once. Now he wasn't sure who he was. Back in his hotel suite, the silence was sharp. Too clean, too cold, too perfect. He poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window, watching the city lights blink far away, but his mind kept drifting back to that dinner. To Lena's voice, her small hand on his, the way she asked, "Are you still sad?" Without fear or shame, no one had ever asked him that, not even when he lost his father, not when his wife left, not when his son walked away from him for good. He had everything, money, power, a name people respected, but at that table he had something else, presence. No one cared who he was, no one judged. No one asked about profits or deadlines. They just made space for him, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The next morning, Christmas Day, Mark woke up earlier than usual. He wasn't sure why, but his chest felt lighter, his mind clearer. He showered, dressed, and sat down with his coffee. But the silence bothered him now. It used to be comforting, no distractions, no demands, but now it felt hollow. He turned on the TV, but turned it off again in less than a minute. The world outside was celebrating, and he was stuck in a cage made of glass and marble. Then, without planning, he reached for the folded napkin swan on the side table. He held it up, smiling quietly, and suddenly found himself opening his laptop. He searched the name on the receipt from the diner, R. Meldon, and within minutes he found something surprising. Raina Meldon, local foster parent, currently raising 3 children, unlimited support. She'd been running a small home for kids with disabilities for years. No interviews, no fame, no social media, just quiet service. She had taken in Lena 3 years ago after a bad situation. There was even a short article from a local paper showing Lena at a piano recital, hands gliding over the keys with joy. Mark stared at the photo for a long time. She looked so alive, so full of something he couldn't name. She couldn't see, but somehow she was guiding people like him, who had everything and still felt lost. That afternoon, Mark made a call, not to his office, not to his lawyers. He called a local bakery and asked for the biggest, warmest Christmas cake they had. He added pies, cookies, a full meal, and gave them the diner's address with a quiet request: deliver this to the Meldon family, with a note that says, "From your friend at the corner table." The woman on the phone smiled at his voice, though she didn't know who he was. She said, "That's real kind, sir," and for once, he didn't brush it off. By evening, he was still alone in the suite, but it didn't feel quite the same. He sat down at the desk and opened an email draft. The address was familiar, his son's. They hadn't spoken in 4 years, not after the last fight. Not after the words neither of them could take back. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He didn't know what to write. How do you explain to your own child that you didn't know how to love properly? That success blinded you, that you forgot birthdays because boardrooms felt safer. Finally, he typed a simple message. "Merry Christmas, Dylan. I met someone yesterday. She reminded me that it's never too late. I miss you, Dad." He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he leaned back, breathing deeply. It wasn't much, but it was honest. And maybe that was enough for now. Outside, the snow kept falling. Children played in the street below, laughing and throwing snowballs. And somewhere across town, a blind girl was opening a box of warm desserts with wide smiles and sticky fingers. She didn't know yet who had sent it, but she would smile anyway. Because she believed in kindness even from strangers, Mark closed his eyes that night, not in a bed of guilt or pressure, but in a place of quiet hope. Because one small question from a child, "Are you having dinner with us?" had become more than an invitation. It had become the start of something he thought he had lost, a new beginning, stitched together by pie, paper swans, and a heart that refused to stay blind to the lonely. The sun peeked through the hotel curtains the next morning, soft and golden, but Mark was already awake. He sat at the edge of the bed, the little paper swan resting on the nightstand beside him. He hadn't slept much, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel exhausted. His thoughts were busy, filled with Lena's voice, the noise of the diner, the smell of cinnamon pie, and the strange warmth that hadn't left him. He thought about calling Raina. But what would he say? "Thank you for letting me sit with you. Thank you for letting me feel like a human again." No, it didn't feel like enough, and yet, doing nothing felt worse. So, he got dressed, picked up a box of small gifts from the local shop, and started. Walking through the snow, he didn't know exactly where he was going, only that he needed to go. It took him longer than he thought to find their neighborhood, not because it was far, but because it was hidden behind places he never bothered to notice. The streets were narrower, the houses smaller. Some broken in parts, but filled with holiday lights. Children ran through the snow in second-hand boots, chasing each other and laughing. One of them stopped when he saw Mark and pointed. "You look like Santa without the red," the boy shouted. Mark smiled. "Maybe I am." The Malden house stood at the end of the street. A modest two-story with peeling paint, but a strong door and music coming from inside. He knocked gently, not sure what to expect. It was Raina who opened the door, dressed in a sweater that had a snowman stitched across it. Her face lit up with surprise when she saw him. "Well," she said with a smile, "look who decided to visit after all." Mark held up the box of small wrapped gifts awkwardly. "I thought I might drop these off," he said. "And maybe, if it's not too late, join you for a few minutes." Raina stepped aside without hesitation. "Come in, the kids will be thrilled." Inside, the house smelled like cocoa and toast. There were handmade decorations hanging on the walls, paper snowflakes, hand-painted stars, and a crooked paper angel on the tree. Lena was sitting cross-legged on the rug near the tree, singing softly to herself while arranging puzzle pieces by touch. She turned her head toward the door, sensing the change in energy. "Is that you?" she asked. Mark stepped forward, his voice softer than usual. "It's me, Lena." She smiled brightly, holding up a puzzle piece like it was a trophy. "I was hoping you'd come back," she said. "You forgot your smile last night." The kids giggled from the kitchen, already racing over to greet him. He knelt and handed them the gift box, letting them pull it apart one item at a time. Simple things, but chosen with care. A scarf, a puzzle, small music box, and a toy snow globe, each one open with wide eyes and real joy. Mark watched them, something deep inside his chest tightening. He had signed billion-dollar deals that made less impact than this moment. Raina brought over hot tea and sat beside him. Her voice gentle. I read the note on the pie. She said, "You made Lena's night." "She made mine," Mark replied without thinking. "She's got that effect," Raina said, sipping her tea. Blind as she is, she sees the best. In people, there was a short pause before Mark asked quietly, "Does she know her situation?" Raina nodded. She knows her mom's gone, that her dad never came back. She knows life hasn't been easy, but she doesn't let it stop her. Mark stared into his cup. Silent. Raina looked at him and said softly, "We all carry something. Mark, the trick is not letting it turn us cold at that moment." Lena stood up and walked straight to the piano in the corner. Her fingers stretched out, finding the keys by memory. She began to play a simple tune, gentle and full of emotion. Everyone grew quiet, even the noisy boys. Mark sat frozen as the notes filled the room, not perfect, but filled with soul. Lena sang along softly, her voice floating like snow. "Let the light in, even when it's small. Let the silence fall, and love be all." Mark felt his eyes sting, and this time he didn't blink it away. He didn't look down, didn't try to control it. He let one tear fall, then another, quietly. He didn't cry for the money, or the deals, or the mansion. He cried for everything. He missed his son's childhood, his wife's last goodbye. The years he spent building walls instead of bridges. When Lena finished playing, she turned to him and said, "Did you cry?" He smiled through it, eyes red. "Yes." "Good," she said, walking toward him with her arms open. Mark leaned down and she hugged him tightly. "You remembered," she whispered. "Just like I hoped." And in that room, filled with soft music and louder hearts, Mark realized something powerful. He hadn't just been invited to dinner. He had been invited back to life by a girl who couldn't see his face, but somehow saw right into his heart. The sky outside turned pink as the sun began to set, casting soft light through the window of the small house. Inside, the room was filled with calm now. Like everyone had just exhaled after a long day, the kids were playing with their new toys. On the floor, giggling and arguing in that harmless way only siblings do, Raina was in the kitchen washing a few dishes, humming along to the Christmas songs playing low on the radio. Mark was still sitting near the piano, watching Lena carefully put her fingers back on the keys. She wasn't playing anything now, touching each one, whispering their names under her breath. Her head moved slightly as she listened to the sounds outside. Footsteps. Whined, someone laughing down the road. "Are you leaving now?" she asked softly. Without turning around, Mark blinked, surprised. "I hadn't decided," he replied. Lena smiled. "Most people leave right after dinner." She paused, then added, "But I didn't want you to." He looked down at the carpet, then at her. "Why not?" he asked gently. "Because," she said, her voice light but serious, "you feel quiet, but also kind, like someone who just forgot how to talk to people for a while." Mark smiled at that, both amused and stunned. "Maybe I did forget," he said, "but it's coming back to me." The front door creaked open, and one of the boys shouted, "We're going caroling." "Miss Raina, can we go?" Raina peeked from the kitchen, drying her hands with a towel. "Only if you stay close and wear gloves." The kids quickly bundled up, tossing on hats and scarves like tiny tornadoes. Raina turned to Mark with a gentle look. "You're welcome to come too," she said. The more voices, the louder the joy. Mark hesitated. Almost out of habit, in his world, people didn't sing in public, especially not CEOs. Especially not on a sidewalk, but his heart spoke before his brain could. "Stop it." "I'd love to," he said, quietly but firmly. The group walked together down the street, the kids holding hands, Lena's cane tapping softly as Raina guided her with calm words. They stopped outside small houses, singing familiar songs. Silent Night, Jingle Bells, and even Rudolph, neighbors, opened doors, smiled, clapped, and offered candy canes. Mark stood in the back at first, just listening. But when Lena started to sing again, her soft voice rising with perfect pitch, he found himself humming along, then singing, not well, but from the heart, at one house. A child in a wheelchair wheeled herself to the front porch and joined in too. Mark watched her eyes light up as she clapped, and suddenly, everything inside him cracked open a little more. This wasn't noise, this was healing. This wasn't childish, it was what being human felt like as the last song ended. The group started walking home. Lena was shivering slightly. Mark carefully took off his scarf and draped it gently over her shoulders. "It's soft," she whispered, feeling the fabric just like your voice. He chuckled. "I don't think anyone's ever said that before." She giggled, holding the scarf tight. Then maybe they weren't listening. Back at the house, the kids ran to get hot cocoa, and Raina handed out mugs topped with marshmallows. The room smelled sweet and warm, like cinnamon and comfort. Mark stood near the door, unsure if this was the moment he should say goodbye. Raina walked over slowly, her eyes understanding without needing many words. "You can stay longer if you want," she said. "We're just watching a movie and pretending not to fall asleep." Mark looked around. He saw the old sofa filled with little bodies wrapped in blankets. He saw Lena already curled up with her cane beside her, resting her head against the couch arm. He saw the tree, still lit, glowing like hope in the corner of the room, and he nodded. "I'll stay," he said softly, "if that's all right." Raina smiled. "Of course it is." They didn't speak much after that. The movie played in the background, but no one really watched it. One by one, the children fell asleep, and Mark sat in the armchair with a blanket Raina had handed him. He looked over at Lena one last time, her breathing slow and steady, a smile still on her lips even in sleep. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel like he had to leave. He didn't feel like he was just a guest. He felt like he belonged in this small house, with mismatched lights and noisy kids and cocoa that was too sweet. He had found something he hadn't felt in years. Not peace, not just joy, but home. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, soft and golden. Mark blinked awake slowly, confused for a moment by the unfamiliar ceiling, the distant snoring of children, and the quiet hum of a heater. He was still in the armchair, wrapped in the same cozy blanket, his shoes neatly placed beside him on the rug. Someone had even laid a small pillow behind his head during the night. He sat up quietly, careful not to wake anyone. The living room was peaceful, the tree lights still glowing faintly, and the scent of cinnamon still floating through the air. Lena was still curled up on the sofa, her cane tucked beside her like a loyal friend. One of the boys had fallen asleep on the floor, half covered in a blanket, one sock missing. Mark stood and stretched gently, then walked to the kitchen, where he found Raina already awake, pouring herself a cup of tea. She smiled when she saw him, handing him a mug without asking. "Sleep okay?" she asked softly. "Better than I have in years," Mark said, taking a sip. They stood there for a moment, not speaking, just listening to the quiet. It felt like the world had slowed down. "In a good way. You look different," Raina said at last. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Lighter," she said, "like someone took a weight off your shoulders while you were sleeping." He smiled faintly, looking down at the cup in his hand. "Maybe someone did," he said. "Or maybe it was that little girl with a paper swan." "And too much wisdom for her age?" Raina laughed softly. "She has that effect on people." As the kids slowly began to wake, the quiet turned into cheerful noise again, laughter, yawns, the tapping of Lena's cane, someone asking for cereal, someone else chasing a sock. Mark helped pass out bowls, even poured milk for the youngest, who looked up at him like he'd always been there. And as they ate, something unexpected Happened, Lena tapped her spoon against her bowl and said, "Can I play a song for everyone before Mr. Mark leaves?" Everyone nodded, still chewing, and she walked to the piano slowly, finding her way by touch. She sat down, hands resting on the keys, and then began to play. The melody was soft, delicate, but full of feeling. There were small pauses where she listened to the room, then kept going, and then she sang. Her voice barely above a whisper. You walked alone through falling snow, with heavy steps and heart hung low. But kindness found you at our door, and now you don't feel lost no more. The room went completely silent, even the youngest kids froze in place, listening. Mark felt his heart twist as her voice floated gently over the simple notes. She kept singing, her head tilted, her face calm. So if you leave, don't leave your smile. Let it stay here for a while. Can come back soon when snowflakes fall, because here, there's room for all. She played the last few notes and let her hands rest on the keys. Then she turned slightly and asked, "Did I get it right?" Mark couldn't speak. His throat was tight, his eyes wet. He nodded slowly, then whispered, "That was perfect." Raina stepped forward and kissed the top of Lena's head, whispering, "You wrote that yourself." Lena nodded proudly. Last night, after the carols. Mark walked over and knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely holding together. She tilted her head, listening to his tone, and said softly, "Promise you won't forget how you feel right now." "I promise," he said. Raina handed him a small envelope. "We weren't sure if you'd come back, but Lena wanted to give you this." Inside was a hand-drawn card with big letters and rough coloring. It said, "You're not alone anymore." With a drawing of a table full of smiling stick people and one tiny figure in the corner with a big red heart, Mark stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. "I don't know what I came here looking for," he said quietly, "but I found it." Raina placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're welcome any time," she said. "Our door doesn't close after Christmas." Mark looked at Lena, who smiled up at him, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting. He bent down and hugged her. A real hug this time. No hesitation, no awkwardness. She hugged him back, just as tight. "You can sit with us every year," she whispered, and in that moment, Mark knew something had changed forever. Not just in this house, but in him. And no matter where he went from here, he would carry that piano song, that paper swan, and that little girl's promise in his heart, always. A week had passed since that unforgettable Christmas. Mark had returned to the city. Back to his penthouse, back to his office, back to the life he had built, brick by brick. But it didn't feel the same anymore. The silence was louder now. The walls looked taller, colder. And the view from his office, once something he took pride in now, looked empty, like a painting with no color. He sat behind his massive desk, staring at the glowing screen of his computer. Emails blinked in. Contracts waited to be signed. Assistants knocked to remind him of meetings, but his mind wasn't here. It was still in that little house filled with paper snowflakes and mismatched socks. Still hearing Lena's voice, singing to him like she could see straight into his soul. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the folded paper swan, its edges now slightly worn. Then he took out the card she gave him. "You're not alone anymore." He read it again, more than once, and slowly leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. It wasn't just a sweet message from a child. It was a challenge, a reminder, a promise he didn't want to break that evening. He walked through the city streets without his driver or assistant. Just him, bundled in a coat, scarf still smelling faintly like cinnamon and cocoa. Every light reminded him of that warm home. Every cold face reminded him how close he had come to forgetting what warmth even felt like. He paused outside a toy store, watching a father lift his daughter up to point at a doll in the window. Mark smiled faintly, heart tugging in ways he didn't expect, the next morning, he made a decision. He called his legal team not for business, but something personal. Then he called a real estate agent in Lena's town, asking for help finding a small property close to the Malden house. Something simple, he said, a place with room for books, a piano, and a real dinner table. Then came the harder call. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't touched in for years. It rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. It was deeper now, older, but still familiar. Hello. Mark cleared his throat. Dylan, it's Dad. There was silence on the other end, the kind that feels heavy and sharp. Mark almost pulled the phone away. But then he heard a quiet breath. I got your message, Dylan said. A pause. Then, Merry Christmas. I guess Mark nodded to himself. Yeah, Merry Christmas. They didn't say much more, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. Over the next few days, Mark visited shelters, soup kitchens, and youth centers, not to take photos or donate in his name, but just to listen, help, and learn. He met people who reminded him of Raina, strong, tired, full of love even when they had nothing. He didn't speak about business deals or stock markets. He just asked how he could help. And slowly, he began to feel human again on New Year's Eve. He sent a letter to Raina's house, addressed to Lena. Inside was a music box that played the song she sang, custom-made by one of his friends in the industry, along with a letter written in large letters, easy for her to read with her fingers. You didn't just invite me to dinner. Lena, you invited me back to the world. This time, I won't walk away. 2 weeks later, Mark returned to town quietly. He walked up the familiar snowy path and knocked on Raina's door. Lena answered first, her cane tapping once before she smiled. I knew it was you, she said. You feel different then. Other people. Mark knelt to her level, smiling. I miss this place, he said. You brought your smile with you this time, she added proudly. And this time, he said softly, I'm staying longer. The house buzzed with excitement as the other kids ran up to hug him. Shouting his name, Raina appeared with open arms, shaking her head with a warm grin. I told them you'd come back, she said. You left your heart here. Mark laughed, but it was true. He had left something behind that night, and now he was here to reclaim it, not with power or money, but with presence that evening. As snowflakes fell once again and cocoa steamed in mismatched mugs, Mark sat at the same old dinner table. A little more worn, a little more crowded, and completely perfect. Lena sat beside him, humming a new song, one she promised to teach him next time, and as laughter filled the room, Mark looked around and knew he had found his place, not just for Christmas, but for every season after. Because one small girl had asked a question that changed everything, and he had finally answered it, not with words, but by showing up again and again, by never sitting alone in the corner again. Spring had arrived quietly in the small town, brushing away the last of the snow. Flowers bloomed along the sidewalks, birds returned to the trees, and the sky stayed lighter just a little longer each evening. But inside the Malden home, one thing hadn't changed: Mark's seat at the dinner table. It had been 3 months since that Christmas Eve. And true to his word, Mark had returned, not just for visits, but to stay. He had bought a small home just 2 blocks away. Nothing grand, just enough space to feel real. The mansion in the city sat untouched now, a cold monument to a life he no longer wanted. Every morning, he walked past Lena's school and waved. Every weekend, he joined the Malden kids for puzzles, piano lessons, or walks to the park. He no longer wore suits unless he absolutely had to, and even when he did, his smile gave him a way softer now. Less forced, more human. Raina called it a miracle in slow motion. She watched Mark fold laundry, take out the trash, and make grilled cheese like a regular dad, she once joked. Didn't you used to run a billion-dollar company? Mark grinned and said, Now I run snack time and bedtime stories, way more complex. But the biggest change happened quietly. It started one afternoon when Lena sat beside him on a bench near the town square. She held his hand like she always did, her cane resting against the bench. You feel happier, she said. Even your hand feels lighter. I am, Mark replied. Watching the sun touch the tops of the buildings, before I met you. I didn't even know I was lonely. Lena nodded like she understood completely. Some people carry quiet sadness, like a song no one else hears, she said, but I heard yours. Mark smiled, eyes misting a little. Yes, you did. He whispered, and you changed it? She reached into her backpack and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. It was a small wooden frame with her latest drawing, rough and colorful. Stick figures, a piano, a house with a heart over it. At the bottom, written in bold, shaky letters. Our family, even the grown-ups, Mark chuckled. Then pulled her close. You made me feel like I belong, he said. You do belong. She replied easily, You just forgot where you fit, that night, back at the Malden house. Raina brought out something new, an extra chair at the table. With a little sign taped to it, it read, Reserved for Mr. Mark. Even when he's late, the kids cheered, and Lena raised her glass of juice. To our very own Christmas friend who stayed, she said. Everyone clapped. And Mark laughed through the tears. He didn't bother hiding anymore. Later, after dinner, when the house grew quiet and the kids were fast asleep, Mark stood outside. Under the stars, the air warm and fresh with spring. Raina joined him with 2 mugs of tea, standing side by side. She said quietly. I think you were meant to find us. Mark nodded slowly, eyes on the sky, and I think I was meant to be found. She glanced over, then added, You ever think about doing more with that heart of yours? He smiled. I've been thinking about it a lot that week. He started planning something new, not another business, but a foundation. A place to support foster homes like Raina's, to give blind children like Lena the tools and music they needed. To reach out to lonely people sitting alone at holiday tables, the way he once did. He called it the Lena Project. And when they asked him at the first meeting why he chose the name, he simply said, Because she didn't just show me kindness. She reminded me who I was and gave me a reason to come back. And every Christmas after that, in the same small town, at the same warm table full of laughter and mismatched chairs, Lena would always ask the same question to any stranger they met. Are you having dinner with us this Christmas? And now, Mark would smile and whisper, That question saved my life, and he meant it, every single word.